All right, this is your project to critique. This is for Kelsey, Laura, and Josh. And we're going to start here with Kelsey and this poster, which I love how you transformed the gun into this butterfly. It's just striking and startling, and it's this mix of beauty and violence all in one. And then your bold create change. Then you go into the butterfly effect, where you say, with reference to chaos theory, the phenomenon whereby a minute localized change in a complex system can have large effects elsewhere. And this poster, like the visuals are grabbing that X right in the middle. As I said, that's this butterfly and these guns. And then they're both pointing at these female figures who have butterflies on their mouths. And there's a lot of ambiguity in here as to what the issue is and what the change is. Obviously the guns drive me in that direction, but then the women with the butterflies over their mouths seem to silence them. Brings me to this sort of Me Too movement right now, and I don't believe that's your intent with this, reading your research statement, but that's kind of what I see in this, and I don't think that's bad. Again, as an artist, I love ambiguity. Um, Posters typically have a much more direct, pointed message, but I don't think there's anything wrong with them. So I really love the layout of this. I don't know if I want it more direct as an artist, certainly not. But if you want to be like a social commentarian, you probably need something here, contextualizing a little bit, a little more language or something. But I really love the layout. I think it's beautiful. And I like the create change, I like the drop shadow. I like the smaller text at the bottom with this much smaller text even here. There's enough room to, it really grabs me, draws me in, pushes me, makes me look around. And then when you don't leave me with anything direct, I really am left like thinking about it, which I said is good. um, I think that's a great bold poster. I really love the layout too. Here, there's a lushness to it. There's a depth, a layering, and it's really interesting how you take a very you're using a lot of the same symbols, the guns, the butterflies. You but you really like flip the switch on like stylization. Here we have something very economical and simple. Um, and here we have all these colors and these layers and this hard edges, soft edges, and then just simple pro-con words, and the gun over the mouth, um, and the female figure in the background. I mean, I just can't help connecting, guns and gun violence directly to the violence perpetrated against women in our culture, and again, that sort of rise of the Me Too movement. Um, Whatever it is, all these images come to me, and I keep thinking of Art Nouveau as I look at how they utilize natural elements, and quite often the feminine, and then all these fluid curving lines. I mean, that's just really what I see. Well, less so on this one, but to a large degree in these first two, I see that. So, and then you have your gun control or self-control, both with or gun control and then self-control with a question mark. That might be nice to have a question mark after gun control too. I think that would keep those things a little more equal, and forcing us to internalize what is it that we're after or should be striving for or should be um, legislating perhaps. But again, the design, the layout, the use of imagery, the text is quite nice. I guess one of my criticisms as I look at these, I just like the posters and I like how you deal with this content. One of my criticisms though in the context of the project is you do make quite pretty big compositional changes though. That's, I'm not really going to say much about that because in a sense these two are the same composition. Feminine figure in the middle, butterfly over its mouth, and then somewhere near there also is a gun or the word gun. That's, I guess, in essence what you have here. This first poster is quite different in compositional structure, but does have a lot of overlap in a lot of different ways. So, you're fine. They're all very interesting looking. I think the first two posters are much more visually grabbing than this one. Though this isn't bad, I just think the first two are just so nice and visually clever. I can look at them more. This seems a little less so, maybe a little more in some ways direct. I don't know. It's good. So I really enjoyed reading your research statement, and I appreciated how you went back and you got motivated to kind of go back to the beginning. Where does this imagery of violence and politics and you took it all the way back to Benjamin Franklin and his newsprint, and you say Franklin, perhaps ahead of his time, understood as well as modern day artists that in order to voice a strong opinion, direct and powerful images with descriptive prose create conversation and even persuades. And so I really appreciate how you really took on and researched further. That's one thing I often do. I'm always curious, like, how did we get here? How did we get here? How did we get here? I ask myself that question all the time. And, I see that in my own work. And so it's good. I also like where you pulled out in page 116 and 17 of our text. You say, Mizrahi says, a world picture does not mean a picture of the world, but the world conceived and grasped as a picture. And then what becomes important in your next paragraph is who's controlling those pictures that we see. Some citizens have limited personal experience with government in the world and posited that the media, through their stories, places ideas in citizens' minds. These ideas become part of the citizens' frame of reference. That's a great statement that you pulled out there from Lippmann. In exploring war and media coverage, I look at the start of political and war coverage. And then I started thinking about, like, wow, just think of, Fox News, MSNBC, other, we could categorize as propaganda. Who has the means to fund their worldview? Can social media even the playing field? But then I started thinking about Russia, and then there's news that China is going to be doing similar things that Russia did with our elections and trying to influence it, and social media. Like, wow, so, I mean, social media has this possibility to give citizens more power over capital M media, but then also not just citizens, but everyone else in the world potentially has this power too, and that's kind of crazy. And I started thinking net neutrality. Yeah, anyways, good thoughts. You also went on to say, in examining political issues and making that info visual, I realized an artist doesn't have to choose one role, because you're talking about the role of the artist. We have to be political. Is that our job? And no, it's not, but quite often we choose that. And you said, I realize artists doesn't have to choose one role. They can act in multiple roles as mediators, facilitators, artists, statement makers, etc. Yeah, I think that's really good to recognize that we can be a lot of different things. That's what I love about art, is that it can be a lot of different things. I can make art about just about anything. And as a person, I get bored with things. It allows me to branch out and explore just about any subject. And I think a lot of that has to do, the role we take on is where we are as a culture. Are we in a place of comfort and stability where we can just explore visuals and aesthetics and kind of enjoy the world? Or in point in our world of upheaval and chaos and transition? And I kind of think that's where we are right now in our world, is a transitional world. The 19th, 20th century was about labor. It was about, industry. Now I think we're becoming about transitioning to information, and the world is going to be remade in the next decade or two or three. And that's a messy process, and I think we're at the beginning of it. Anyways, I also like how you end off with the quote from Francis Alès. Society allows the artist, unlike the journalist, the scientist, the scholar, or activist, to issue a statement without any demonstration. This is what we call poetic license. Nice. I'm going to leave it right there and move on. All right, we are going to look at Laura's images next. And I did love this photograph. Very pleased to see you take that one and push it further. And what you leave us with here, simple image, square format, which is different than a traditional poster format, but looking at a lot of like Instagram in particular, that seems to be a rising driver amongst young people, and everything is put into a square. So I was curious if you're thinking about that as you put it in the square format. And so we have that photograph. I like the desaturation of it, and then it has this sort of, warm sepia tone to it, which speaks of older photographs. But you also leave a little saturation. That rooster's head right there has a little teeny bit of red in there, and I like how that kind of emphasizes it a little bit. And you just at the bottom put in drowning in memories. Now the font you use is also interesting. It also seems to be sort of a like a font that might be used for weddings or something like that. So has that connotation. It kind of overlaps. I like that there's a transparency to that. Kind of allows the image up here to bleed into the images down here. And with this, so it becomes this sort of Venn diagram-ish sort of thing where things meet. And drowning in memories is a little bit vague, but as I like to say, as an artist, I don't mind the ambiguity. I often find that a positive, leaving me a place to explore. But posters quite often have a much more direct message. But yeah. So as we move on to your next poster. Oh, this is so interesting. It's drowning in stuff, and that word stuff. There's a interesting video on the web, The Story of Stuff, I think it's called. Could be a good thing to look at. Yeah, drowning in stuff. That stuff has sort of a negative connotation where it's, here we're looking at the stuff as memories, and here we're just looking at stuff, this thing that's separate from us. It's not necessary, it's extra, and then there's all this extra stuff. And I like how the images down here become much more overt and colorful and similar to this up here, and just kind of move with all this stuff, and you kind of flow into it. But there's a slight separation. This nice use of the circle slightly separates this image of the figure with the stuff, and then just the stuff down below, kind of emphasizing that human interaction and relationship between it, and also seems to be a critique on capitalism a little bit. You got Xbox and chicken and all the other stuff here, and then our drowning. So I really like, and your layouts are very similar, and I like how you play with the different saturations. In the end, though, I don't think those are what makes as much difference as your choice of verbiage, and that's very legitimate. I mean, that's what these posters are all about: exploring how the image and word relate, and how they can push and pull each other, and just this choice of stuff. Also, drowning is a negative connotation, but I think stuff. Here, drowning in memories is not even taken like negative. We think of drowning as negative, but we love our memories, and then they're thinking about, oh, we're all these memories, and that's like a positive sort of thing. But then we're drowning in stuff. I think well done posters. They seem fairly simple and direct, but there's nice. I like your text. You don't even rely on other, smaller words. Just your very 3 words that you choose. There's a lot of, a fairly economical use of text, which is effective. So well done there. Looking at your research, things that popped out to me. You said it seems crazy that he, referring to John Hartfeld in 1930s Germany, was never imprisoned for his brazen political critique. It takes more effort from the viewer to analyze an image for meaning, and in general is quieter and less obvious way to criticize. For many, art has been a safe way to voice concern and raise questions over policy and procedure. And that brings an interesting point to me. These Hartfeld posters. I've never really done the research to see where were they hung. I mean, I just kind of, I like the visuals too, and I like the information that he gives me and shows me a different side and a deeper understanding of that time period. much more nuance as to what people knew that, were not always shared, it seems. Um, but where were these posters hung? And is it easier for you to get away with hanging a poster than to speaking? If you're on TV saying those, on the radio, maybe Heartfelt wouldn't have lasted as long as he did last, because it is interesting that much of the 30s, he seems to survive in Germany, but he did eventually have to flee. Um, yeah, that's an interesting thought. So, um, so you also go on and you point out lack of representation is a powerful tool, and Mizraff explains this well. Yeah, who gets the platform? Who gets to talk? Who gets to be seen talking? Who gets to share their work and in places that are impactful? That is a really good thought to point out, as well as not only France. You talk about France's economy, but the economy of much Western civilization built on slavery, and then how that affects modernity. To me, you go on to say, to me, the video points out both the lack of visual literacy in our culture, where many could miss the significance of certain artworks used in video and the overall message communicated. And you're referring here to Beyonce and Jay-Z's new video, which I haven't seen, but now I want to go see after you talk about it, because I think you did a good job of breaking it down. I just pulled that out because that's one of my things is, are we raising a visually literate society? And yes, people knew how to use stuff. Yes, people know how to use their eyes, but do they understand what they're looking at and where that comes from, the symbols that come from? We don't always understand the symbols that are used, and there's some ignorance, and I don't know if that's purposeful ignorance, and we have to educate people. When I read that, the thing I thought about was, a few years ago, not a year ago, last couple of years, there were a lot of protests, Black Lives Matter, whatnot, and one of the things that they did for a little while was to protest on freeways, and that seems kind of dangerous and disruptive, and of course it's intentionally disruptive, and but I had to research. I was like, why are they doing this? And researching it, and then you learn about, and I had some awareness, but I became much more aware there that freeways were used to often disrupt vibrant African American neighborhoods in cities, and you can see that in city after city after city after city. There would be a really culturally rich, neighborhood of African Americans, and they would plow it under and put a freeway right there. And it's difficult not to assume that is a form of structural racism. And that's why Black Lives Matter was doing it. And, it's like, it makes sense. It still is like, wow, you're on, really disruptful, and people aren't going to respect it, and people aren't going to get it. And so many people don't get it, still don't get it, don't do the research to understand it as to why they're doing it, and then educating people can be a perilous journey, because I had a childhood friend. We were friends on Facebook, and he was all upset about this, and I tried to educate him about why they're doing it, and yeah, maybe it's not the best idea, I don't know, but trying to tell him, and eventually he unfriended me over it because he felt I was talking down to him. Yeah, social media, education. Ugh. So anyways, yeah, a lot of good stuff in there. And yeah, so all right, I think we'll leave it at that. Leave it right there, Laura. So we'll move on, and we will look at Josh's work. And very obviously looking at the pay gap. The pay gap between highest and lowest paid workers at the Joslin is 15 to 1. And then you have the tiers of spite and bitterness. And, being someone who's aware of this pay gap, I'm like, 15 to 1? That's not too bad, It's kind of a reasonable gap, but, you can understand, if you're making, 30,000, and that means the person on top is making close to $500,000. Yeah, that's quite a difference, isn't it? Wow. Um, but what's scarier is we look at this poster and the pay gap between highest and lowest earners at Fortune 500 companies, 330 to 1. And, I don't know. I'm assuming that your tears here are ones of irony when it says joy and thanks. And and maybe now. See, I was like confused when I was first looking at these, um, because I was like, oh, why is he joy and thanks at 330 to 1? But I finally made the connection with your nonprofit workers, where these posters, in a sense, are working in tandem. Um, but now here you're joyful because you're only 15 to 1. And we wonder why. So many studies are done right now. I read about cost of living, how it takes like 2.5 minor minimum wage jobs to afford housing in this country, in the average place, and that is just absolutely insane. And there's this problem here, obviously, and 330 to 1 is horrible. And I'm like, oh, I've seen higher numbers. I did a quick research, and we have Manpower, the temp agency, is 2,483 to 1. Place called Aptiv, 2,526 to 1. That's Del Monte, 1,465 to 1. It's like, wow, just crazy. So I guess one of my criticisms is, this poster standalone, I don't think would work, but worked in tandem with your other one. They almost have to be side by side, I think, to really function, to get your message across. And I don't know that that's a criticism, but it is an observation, which is what criticism is. So anyway, I'll go on my soapbox of how criticism is not inherently negative. It is just analysis. Anyway, all right. So, but anyways, the visuals, bold. There's like a very cutout collagey feel, which is we're doing a collage. So I think that kind of helps emphasize these things. I don't know, like I kind of like, they feel like 8-bit digital Nintendo, cutouts there now. And I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe that helps emphasize them, or if we found something a little more higher resolution feeling, a little smoother transition, maybe you could even add volume or something. Maybe it wouldn't be as effective, because maybe we need those things to stand out. Or maybe I want them a little bit bigger. Maybe the tears should get bigger. Thanks, you barely fit in there. Maybe we should just make that tear just, big, and thanks. And maybe a third one, or something more progressive. And these are the things I was starting to think about with this. Now, and your text here also, I think you get your point across very directly, and that's great for a poster. There's a fair amount of text, and that's, one thing. Posters need to grab people's attention, make them see it. And so I think this could work as a full-size poster, but when we put it as a little meme, if we think of a poster as a thing that pops up on us while we're on our social media or something like that, maybe it would have enough. Does it have enough to grab the viewer? That's what I kind of wonder as I look at this. Does it have enough to grab the viewer? Maybe it does. I don't know. Some of my thoughts. So, but then looking at your research, you're saying that I liked how you went and talked about Josiah Wedgwood, a British abolitionist, and he has a piece called "Am I Not a Man and a Brother?" and how that was, you say, through the commodization of this image, abolitionism was incrementally normalized and moved towards the political center of public opinion. The power of visual culture and mass production was only beginning to rise. That is a great observation. Thank you for finding that. That is really nice and interesting, because it sees early people are able to, use commodification in a positive, constructive manner to normalize equality. And there's a power there. Now, the problem with that is, man, does that take a long time, and we're still not there. But it helped normalize it enough that we could, work towards, in England, I'm assuming there was some watershed moment, as we had in the United States, a few watershed moments, trying to achieve racial equality, which we're not there yet. Obviously, we seem to be going backwards a little bit in some ways. It's such a long process, So you go on to say, we look at Michael Ray Charles, one of the artists looked at in the Art 21. For Charles, these images are foundational to American pop iconography. His adaptation of these images are both political and powerful. By dropping the Sambo and Mammy archetypes into contemporary visual culture, he reveals the biases of both historical and modern traditions. Yeah, and then it goes back to the education. How many of us have a recollection of the Sambo and the Mammy? There's a piece of work that a graphic designer created in the 1960s with Aunt Jemima as the focal point that I often use in my Art 118 color design, foundational design class. And we talk about that structure and the symbolism, and very few people are able to answer what a mammy is, or maybe they just don't want to share. So you have to explain this to them. But so how much of it needs explanation and research? Yeah, that's good. I also liked how you went on to say, the consumption episode of Art 21 looks dated. The program seems to be one of the last to make the jump from video to digital. I was surprised at some of the attitudes expressed by some of the artists, especially Andrea Zitel's. Her fascination with isolation, self-reliance, and her comfortable, adventurous upbringing seems especially tone-deaf. And it's funny, like, how quickly sometimes things can change. We talked about how slow things can be to change with, Rachel, but, it's also interesting how quick ideas and change. And I would relate this to a little bit like this Me Too movement. Suddenly all this is coming to the forefront, and that is a good thing. And it's also interesting to see how many people are swept up to it, and how sometimes that gets abused. That quick change. It also seems to me like interesting that the Me Too movement is having more success right now than, say, the Black Lives movement. I don't know why that is. It makes me wonder if we give up on sexism over racism more easily. But then I start thinking about the last few presidential elections, how we had an African-American male achieve the presidency before a female of any race. And we still don't have a female of any race in there. And, I don't know, there's just a lot of questions in there. But, I thought you brought up some good points with those too. So, okay, all right. I think we need to move on.